The reception line at Gerald Ashford's funeral had been moving for 11 minutes when the woman in the wine-red dress walked past it entirely. She didn't wait her turn. She didn't lower her voice. She walked straight to the small table near the flowers where the urn sat between two framed photographs. She picked up the frame on the left, a picture of Gerald on a boat, laughing, sunburned, and said, to no one in particular but loud enough for the whole room, he would have hated how they set this up. 19 years of marriage were standing 4 feet away from her in a gray dress, and she didn't so much as glance in that direction. Naomi Ashford did not flinch. She did not set down her coffee. She thanked the next person in line for coming, and the one after that, and did not look at the woman by the urn even once. This is the story of Naomi Ashford, and the piece of paper the wine-red dress didn't know existed. To understand what happened at that reception, you have to understand what Gerald Ashford had built and what he thought he'd built alone. 19 years earlier, Gerald was running 2 HVAC service trucks out of a rented garage bay in Dayton, Ohio, doing residential furnace repairs for $40 a call. By the time he died, Ashford Climate Solutions had 41 employees, a fleet of 18 vehicles, and annual revenue that hovered a little over $2.3 million. Commercial contracts mostly. Office buildings, a couple of school districts, 1 hospital wing. It was, by any reasonable measure, a real company. Gerald liked to say he built it with his bare hands, and in the early years that was almost literally true. What he left out when he told that story at Chamber of Commerce dinners was the 11-year-old loan. The company nearly folded in its 7th year when a commercial client went bankrupt owing Ashford Climate close to $90,000 and the bank wouldn't extend the line of credit to cover payroll. Gerald needed $180,000 in 6 weeks or he was going to lay off half his crew and possibly lose the building lease. The bank agreed to the loan on one condition, real collateral, something with equity that wasn't already tied up in the business. Naomi's father had died 2 years before that, and the 60 acres of farmland he left her, out past Xenia, was sitting there unencumbered. She signed the papers. She didn't ask Gerald to split anything with her afterward. She just kept doing the books, the way she always had, and never brought it up again. Gerald told people he'd built the company. What he generally didn't mention was that he'd built it twice, and the second time, it was on his wife's father's land. By the time we're talking about now, Naomi had been the company's bookkeeper of record for 15 years. Unpaid, technically, though Gerald called it her contribution, when anyone asked, in a tone that made contributions sound smaller than it was. She reconciled the books every month. She knew every vendor. She knew, within a few dollars, what the company should be spending in any given quarter. Which is why, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, roughly 2 years before the funeral, she noticed a charge on the company credit card statement to a vendor she had never heard of, for an amount that didn't match anything on the job schedule, and felt something shift very quietly into place. Here's the question most people ask at this point in the story. If she saw it that early, why didn't she say something right then? The honest answer is that Naomi didn't recognize an affair in March. She recognized an accounting irregularity. 14 months before Gerald's funeral, and that timing matters, so hold on to it. A photo synced quietly to a shared iCloud photo stream that Gerald had set up years earlier, back when his mother was dying and he wanted the whole family to be able to drop in slideshow pictures for the memorial service without emailing them back and forth. He'd forgotten, in the way people forget settings on devices they don't think about, that the stream was still live, still pulling in his phone's automatic screenshots and location-tagged photos, still landing quietly on Naomi's tablet in the kitchen along with birthday party pictures from his sister and grainy shots of somebody's new puppy. A hotel confirmation screenshot showed up between 2 unrelated photos on a Thursday morning while Naomi was making coffee. She didn't go looking for it. It simply arrived the way a birthday reminder arrives, uninvited and impossible to unsee. She didn't say anything that day either. Here's the part people misunderstand about a woman like Naomi Ashford. Her instinct ran toward verification, not confrontation. She'd spent 15 years reconciling numbers that didn't add up on their own. A missing invoice, a vendor who double-billed, an employee expensing a hotel stay that ran 2 nights longer than the job required, and every single time, the fix wasn't yelling. It was documentation. So when the first piece of evidence about her husband's marriage arrived exactly the way a discrepancy in a ledger arrives, quietly, on its own, without her having gone looking, some part of her simply filed it and kept working, the same way she'd have filed a receipt. There was also, underneath the instinct, a colder calculation, one she wouldn't have said out loud to anyone at that point, not even to herself in so many words. She had been married to a man who controlled the money conversation for 19 years. If she came at him with one hotel screenshot and no plan, she'd lose the argument, lose the moral high ground by seeming hysterical, and learn nothing else. If she waited and watched, she'd learn how deep it went, who else was involved, and what, if anything, it was going to cost her. So she waited, and she watched. To understand why Naomi's patience went deeper than temperament, you have to go back 11 years, to a Tuesday in a law office that had nothing to do with her. Gerald's father, Harold Ashford, had died 4 years into Gerald and Naomi's marriage, and the estate had turned into the kind of fight nobody in the family talked about at holidays anymore. Harold's second wife, not Gerald's mother, a woman he'd married 3 years after the divorce, contested the will, and contested it hard, on the grounds that Harold had promised her the lake cabin verbally, regardless of what the paperwork said. It took 2 years, and roughly $60,000 in legal fees to resolve, and it ended with the cabin sold and the money split 3 ways between lawyers and a family that no longer spoke at Thanksgiving. Gerald watched that happen up close, in his late 20s, and it left a mark on him that Naomi understood better than almost anyone else in his life. He came home from one of those hearings and told her, flatly, that nothing like that was ever going to happen to them. Whatever they built, whoever ended up with it, there would be no ambiguity, no verbal promises somebody could stand up in a courtroom and swear to. So when the bank loan crisis hit 3 years later and Naomi put her father's land on the line, Gerald did something that, in hindsight, none of them fully appreciated the weight of at the time. He had his attorney draft a revocable living trust, naming Naomi as sole successor trustee and sole beneficiary of the company, the real estate, and a $600,000 keyman life insurance policy the bank had required as a condition of the loan. He built in a no-contest clause, language that says, in essence, that if anyone challenges the terms of the trust, they forfeit any claim they might otherwise have had under it, full stop. He told Naomi it was because she'd bailed the company out with her father's land and deserved the security. He told his attorney it was because he'd be damned if any version of what happened to his father's cabin ever touched what he and Naomi had built. Both of those things were true. Neither of them was the reason Gerald thought would eventually matter most. He signed it in a conference room on a Wednesday afternoon, shook the attorney's hand, and more or less forgot about it for a decade. It was the way people forget about smoke detectors, insurance riders, anything you set up once because it's the responsible thing to do and then never think about again until the day you desperately need it to have been there. The second hotel charge came 4 months after the first screenshot in July, and this one Naomi went looking for on purpose, not on Gerald's phone, which she never touched, but on the company card statement she was already reconciling as part of her ordinary work. She started a notebook. Not a spreadsheet, not a phone note, not anything that lived on a device that could sync, be subpoenaed, or read as a deliberate campaign of surveillance against her husband. A plain black and white composition notebook, the kind you'd buy for a kid's science class, that she kept in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in the room they called the office, underneath old tax returns nobody was ever going to look through. In it, she wrote dates, amounts, and a plain description of each one against what she remembered of Gerald's travel schedule that week. Around the same time, Gerald mentioned casually at dinner while scrolling his phone that he had a conference in Columbus that weekend. Client relations, nothing exciting. Naomi asked, in the most ordinary tone she could manage, whether she should expect a receipt for the room. Gerald didn't even look up. "It's handled," he said. 5 words. She wrote them down that night, verbatim, next to the date. By October, the pattern had a name attached to a line item, not just a hotel confirmation with no context. A new vendor started appearing on the company books, Reyes Event Consulting, LLC. They billed roughly $1,800 a month for what the invoices described as marketing and client relations services. Naomi, as the person who processed every vendor invoice that came through the company, had to be the one to enter it, code it to an expense category, and cut the check. She recognized the name almost immediately, though not from anywhere Gerald would have guessed. Portia Reyes had been introduced to her, briefly, 18 months earlier at a trade show dinner, the event coordinator hired by one of Gerald's commercial clients, 33 years old, sharp, good at her job, entirely unremarkable in a room full of vendors doing their jobs. Naomi had shaken her hand once and forgotten her within a week. She didn't confront Gerald about the invoice. She photographed it every month as it came in, added to a growing stack she kept in a manila folder inside the same filing cabinet drawer. Her reasoning, if you'd asked her, wouldn't have sounded like a wife protecting her marriage. It would have sounded like a bookkeeper protecting a company. If these payments were ever questioned by an auditor, a bank, or anyone else down the line, she wanted a clean paper trail showing exactly what had gone out, when, and under what description, regardless of what it turned out the money was actually for. The closest anyone came to saying it out loud happened by accident, on a Sunday evening in January, when the house phone rang. Nobody used the landline anymore except Gerald's mother and the occasional robocall. So when Naomi picked up and heard a woman's voice start to say something before catching herself and hanging up mid-sentence, it registered as strange before it registered as anything else. Gerald, sitting across the room, glanced up and said it was probably a client's assistant, somebody with a work question who'd grabbed the wrong number off an old business card. Naomi let it go, outwardly. She didn't ask a second question, didn't bring it up again that night or any night after. But the notebook got a new line that evening, just the date, and 4 words, landline, hung up, probably a client. It was around this point, 9 months before the funeral, that she made her first appointment with Denise Okafor, an estate and probate attorney, 2 towns over, whose name she'd gotten from a woman at church, who mentioned, once, in an offhand way, that Denise had helped her sort out a complicated family trust after her own husband passed. Naomi didn't go in asking about divorce. She went in with one narrow, specific question: given the terms of a revocable trust that already existed, what would happen to that trust, and to its no-contest clause, if she simply stayed married and something happened to her husband, versus if she filed for divorce herself. Denise pulled up the document Naomi brought with her, read it twice, and told her, in plain terms, that the trust as written was about as airtight as trusts get, provided nothing changed it in the meantime. Naomi thanked her, paid for the consultation, and went home. The affair nearly became public 2 months before Gerald died, at the company's holiday party, held that year in the banquet room of a hotel downtown. Portia was there, not as a guest officially, but as the event's outside vendor coordinator, hired, Gerald explained to anyone who asked, because she'd done such good work on a trade show earlier that year. She stood near Gerald for most of the evening in a way that made one of the younger dispatchers, a woman named Ashley who'd had 2 glasses of wine, start to say something to Naomi near the coat check. It was something that began with, "I probably shouldn't say this, but..." Then Naomi, gently and without any visible reaction, steered the conversation toward the shrimp cocktail and whether the caterer had remembered Ashley's allergy this year. Ashley let it drop. Naomi never found out what she'd been about to say and never asked. That night, driving home, Gerald was in an expansive mood, the kind he got after a few drinks at company events when he liked to talk about the future of the business. Somewhere in the middle of a sentence about expanding into a 4th county, he said, almost as an aside, that he was going to make sure Portia was taken care of long-term. She'd done a lot for the company, he said, more than people realized. Naomi said that was nice of him. She didn't ask what taken care of meant. She wrote the sentence down that night as close to word for word as she could remember it, in a notebook that by then had close to 30 entries in it, spanning nearly a year. Gerald Ashford collapsed at his desk on a Thursday morning in February, 3 weeks before the reception, where a woman in a wine-red dress would pick up a photograph that wasn't hers to touch. The cause, according to the county coroner, was a sudden cardiac event, no warning, no prior diagnosis, the kind of thing that happens to seemingly healthy 51-year-old men more often than anyone likes to admit. In the days that followed, while the funeral home handled arrangements and Gerald's sister flew in from Cleveland, Naomi met with Denise Okafor again, this time not to ask a hypothetical question, but to formally activate her role as successor trustee under a document that had been sitting, unchanged, in a fireproof box for 11 years. It was, from a legal standpoint, almost anticlimactic. The trust did exactly what it had been drafted to do. Naomi signed where Denise indicated, and the company, the real estate, and the insurance proceeds moved, cleanly and without ambiguity, into her control. Portia found out Gerald had died the same way most of his employees did, through a company-wide email about the funeral arrangements. What she apparently didn't know, in the days between his death and the reception, was that she had never had any legal claim to anything Gerald had verbally promised her. She began texting Naomi's phone directly, a number she must have gotten off an old company directory, asking, with increasing insistence, what Gerald had set up for her. A car. A down payment on a condo she said he'd been helping her save toward. Naomi didn't respond to any of the messages. She screenshotted each one and added them to the folder. Which brings us back to the reception and the woman in the wine-red dress standing at the table with the flowers and the urn. After the comment about the photograph, the one about how Gerald would have hated how they'd set things up, Portia didn't stop there. Emboldened, apparently, by 3 leaks of unanswered texts, she turned and walked directly toward Naomi in front of a room that included Gerald's sister, 4 of his senior employees, and Denise Okafor, who had come, quietly, at Naomi's invitation, and was standing near the back with a manila folder of her own. "He told me he was going to take care of me," Portia said, not quietly. "The condo, the car, he said the company would help with that. You know that's true. You have to know that." Naomi set down her coffee. "He may have said that to you," she said, "but he put something else in writing 11 years ago, and it says otherwise." She didn't raise her voice. She nodded to Denise, who stepped forward and, without ceremony, handed Portia a single folded page, a summary letter, not the full trust document. It explained in plain language that the company, its assets, and the associated life insurance proceeds belonged, in full, to a trust naming Naomi Ashford as sole beneficiary, with a no-contest clause that voided any claim brought against it. Alongside it, Naomi produced the manila folder from the filing cabinet, 14 months of consulting invoices from Reyes Event Consulting, LLC, photographed and dated, each one a record of exactly what had been paid, to whom, and under what description, regardless of what anyone later claimed it was actually for. "Any promise that isn't in writing isn't a claim," Naomi said. "It's just something somebody said." She picked her coffee back up. The room was very quiet. By early summer, Ashford Climate Solutions was still operating out of the same building, with the same 41 employees, running under a name quietly shortened on the trucks and the letterhead to drop the founder's initials from the logo, a small change, the kind most customers never notice. Portia's attorney sent one letter, in March, raising the question of the verbal promises Gerald had made. Denise Okafor responded with a copy of the trust's no-contest clause and a brief explanation of what pursuing the claim would cost and forfeit if it went nowhere, which, given the clause, it was always going to. There was no reply after that. Naomi still keeps the composition notebook. It's closed now, tucked in the same filing cabinet drawer, underneath the same old tax returns, not because she needs it for anything anymore, but because it's the only complete record of exactly how long she waited, and exactly what she knew, before she ever said a word. Naomi never told anyone at the company why the letter had changed, and nobody asked twice. Ashley, the dispatcher who'd almost said something at the holiday party, mentioned once, months later, that she'd always figured Naomi simply hadn't wanted Gerald's initials on anything anymore, grief being what it is. Naomi let her think that. It was easier, and it wasn't entirely wrong. Denise Okafor still handles the company's legal filings on retainer, a small monthly fee that Naomi approves personally now, the way she approves every invoice that crosses her desk, out of habit as much as anything else. The two of them meet for coffee every few months, not really about business anymore, and Denise has said, more than once, that in 11 years of estate work she has rarely seen a document do exactly what it was built to do, with no ambiguity left for anyone to argue about later. Naomi usually just nods at that. She already knew. Somewhere in a box in that same office sits a photograph from a boat trip, the one that used to sit in a frame on a table near an urn and a spray of white flowers, a woman in a wine-red dress reaching for it, certain, for just a moment, that it was hers to hold.